right, guys, joined here by my friend Luke Thomas ahead of a crazy weekend for MMA and the heels of an interesting morning in Perth, Western Australia. I got a chance to be there live, Luke. It was an interesting experience. There was some good fights. There was a rowdy crowd at 6:30 in the morning and some interesting referee calls. But I'm excited to be going into UFC 320. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I followed your coverage. I don't know what the reception was like there, but I thought, given the circumstances, that was about as good as it was going to be.
It was a packed out crowd. They had to slash the prices down to $49. And Jacob.
That's what they should be, dude. That's what they should be. Like, dude, the first ever, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
no, jump in.
Before I ever was able to convert to covering full time, the first ever UFC fight night, so not numbered event, but fight night I went to was, I apologize, was Florian versus Lausanne. That was at the First Bank Center in Broomfield, Colorado, which is right outside Denver. And the ticket, like, part of the joy of that was, okay, did you see the premier stars? No, but you got to see like really cool, like Jeremy Stevens, I think, was on that card as well. There was a bunch of, there were some interesting fights on the card, and it was super affordable. I remember how cheap it was. I couldn't believe it. So, like, that's what they should be, dude. Those fight night cards should be affordable.
Yeah, and I was talking to Dave Shaw after the fight, and he said that this was apparently their biggest fight night gate in the history of Australia. Last one was in 2018. So, of course, you got to look at how the dollar's changed. But that was a pretty big card in Adelaide. That was the one where it was like Tyson Pedro, Shogun, Mark Hunt, Justin Willis, and Tai Tuivasa, JDM. So you got to think, if they're slashing the prices down to $49 American, but they're still able to have such a great gate and still make money, it would have been kind of cooler if that was like that and it got sold out from the get-go. We could have avoided this whole people freaking out thing.
That's right. It ended up doing pretty well in the end. I don't think you'd look at those numbers and be like, oh, this is some kind of failure. But to your point, like the way that it got there brought the buzz down, or rather I should say, like, it made it such that the only buzz was that story. You know what I mean?
It was a strange one. And it's the thing I kept telling everyone, which is if Jiri Khalil was a week earlier at UFC Perth in the main event, and if Dominic Reyes versus Ulberg was on this card this weekend, the fans would have jumped for joy in Australia, because they don't get a chance to see fighters, non-Australian fighters. You know what I mean?
Right.
Anyway, so it was almost like a regional card under the UFC banner minus a couple of fighters, but it was great to see all the fans enjoy themselves. It was great to get a chance to go to JDM's gym, see him up close, see him hit some pads, speak to his coaches, and catch up with Alex Volkanovski and some other people. By the way, just quickly with Alex Volkanovski, I don't know if you saw, he mentioned to me there's a spanner in the works with Murphy.
Okay, what does that? What is it? What is a spanner?
So I guess that's Aussie slang for there's an issue with the Murphy fight. It might not be Murphy after all, and they're working on something else. Interesting to note for everybody out there, Hunter Campbell was on the ground. So I'm talking to Rob. He was there, I think, to negotiate with the whole CKB team. Izzy was there ready to talk about his next fight. But I keep hearing February, Sydney. If it's not Murphy, though, and I don't think it's Mosa, who would it be, Luke? Can't be Diego Lopez too, can it?
I don't think so. I mean, yes, his win over Silva was great. I don't think any of us would argue otherwise. But the gap between him and Volk was pretty big. I don't know. I mean, dude, are they going to go Yair? Are they gonna pull the trigger on that and like not do it on? It'd be so weird that they wouldn't have done that on UFC Noche UFC, and then it would save it. But I don't know. I don't get it. I don't quite get it.
It was bad for Noche. This is worse. And then I guess maybe they're doing City. Anyway, let's get to UFC 320, man. There's a lot going on this card this coming weekend. I feel like the fans are getting back on board. They're excited about the sport again. I'm seeing numbers go up, thankfully. This main event between Alex Pereira and Ankalaev. Pereira's been taking his camp seriously. He's no longer in Sydney a couple of weeks out doing side quests. He looks like he's in great shape. Okay, so my question to you is, what are the key things that he needs to do differently here against Ankalaev to have a shot in this rematch?
Poatan, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, sort of a big part of it is what you kind of already alluded to. But also, it should not go unmentioned. Pereira disputed the extent to which he was observing it, but you'll recall that Ankalaev had to go through Ramadan during part of the first camp in order to. The only time he broke fast was for weight cutting, by his own admission. So that's, that played a role in the first fight. That will not play a role here to the extent that it was, observed in the way that Ankalaev said it was. Anyway, what I'm trying to make is you're asking about Poatan. Man, it just seemed like I rewatched the fight before today's conversation. I've watched it now a bunch of times. And what I really come back from this is it looks like it's not like Poatan didn't look like himself, right? In other words, he didn't fight in a way that felt foreign stylistically. He did not move in a way that did not necessarily seem that something seemed obviously amiss. That is not me saying that there wasn't something wrong, but I guess the point I'm trying to make is, he kind of moved and reacted as normal with a pretty big caveat, just at a much lower volume. I looked at the volume in this fight. So if you go back and you just measure it against time, so what was not his overall average, but what he was throwing in volume in his previous fights. In the Ankalaev fight, it was like 3.5 significant strikes per minute. In the Roundtree fight, it was double that. In the Prochazka fight, it was even more than that. And technically, mathematically, in the Jamal Hill fight, it was just ever so slightly more than that. But the point being is this was like a clear reduction. I'm trying to say, like, sometimes you'll see guys injured or like clearly having to fight in a way where they're adjusting for something, some kind of big strength of their opponent or something that's wrong with them. And I didn't necessarily see that. I just saw a guy who's usually at volume 8 or 9 turn down to volume, I don't know, 4 or 5, 3 or 4, something like that. And so I bring that up to say is part of the problem that he had in this was occasionally he would land. First of all, he was very consistent with the leg kicks in general, got away from them maybe a little bit in the middle of the fight, but certainly started strong with them. Going back to that's going to be essential. He was able to land the right hand at times. He even landed the right hand left hook a little bit. He just never really pulled the trigger very often. If part of what was holding him back in the first fight, Dennis, was that he was injured, then you would imagine just on a pure, like, what kind of volume I can deliver issue, there should be significantly more. He must have been hinted by his own logic. If we're looking at the numbers and tying it to what he said his performance was, basically what he's suggesting is the injury hampered him, and particularly had a hand injury, apparently, from throwing the right as much as he wanted to, and there was all kinds of problems with that. I'm going to say stay consistent with the leg kicks. I don't necessarily think he has to avoid backing up, but it's going to be part of it. He did okay with the takedown defense, but he had problems with separation. Mark Goddard did separate in the 4th round, and there were a couple of turns that Poatan was able to score, but that's got to be quicker. But more to the point, he has to win that lead hand battle. He was kind of doing it at times, but not really enough. He wasn't mixing up the attack as often as he needed to because he was just kind of static and a little bit defensive. That's got to go up. And so I again, based on the way he moved in the first fight, I wonder if it's I wonder if it's largely a volume issue.
It's fascinating as well because Magomed Ankalaev, he's not really like a takedown artist, but the story in this first fight was, well, is he going to get Alex Pereira down? And Alex was able to stop his 12 takedowns, right? But more interestingly, Ankalaev was able to get Alex up against the fence quite a bit. And in those situations, he was sort of able to dominate Alex in the way that, he was able to wrestle him in good positions. He was able to land shots. He was able to tire Alex out. And I felt like in Alex's head, as the fight went on, one of the reasons why he didn't move forward, maybe restricted some of those leg kicks, is maybe his team wanted to reduce the opportunities that Ankalaev had to get the takedown. I saw Tim Welch do a breakdown, and he said that he felt like Pereira wasn't aggressive enough and that Ankalaev took advantage and was aggressive. So from your perspective, Luke, obviously, if you're Pereira, you want to go out there, you want to utilize that aggressiveness, get that respect early because that's important, right? But at the same time, how do you balance that with not opening yourself up to, I suppose, these next 12 takedowns in this next fight that Ankalaev is going to try and land?
Again, to your point, I'm not going to dismiss the takedown capability of Ankalaev. It's there. It's not overwhelming, but it's... Sorry, you might be able to hear Can you hear the ambulance going by?
Yeah. Everything okay there, Luke?
Yeah,
okay?
I left the window open. Sorry about that.
Okay, you're watching in DC Saturday. What's happening over there?
Yes,
so I have to check
we're
from
under
time to time.
siege. Yeah, of course. Like send in the Marines. All right. In all seriousness, what was the question again? I got all derailed.
No, well, the question is, how do you think Alex Pereira is able to balance being aggressive,
Oh,
while at the
right.
same time making sure that he doesn't give Ankalaev opportunities. And even though Ankalaev is not a takedown artist, he did go for 12 takedowns, and I'm guessing this will be a major part of his game plan in the rematch.
Yeah. At a bare minimum, a threat to go up and down with the attack, right? At a bare minimum, even if he scores nothing, which basically he did in the first fight. I mean, I want to be clear about this. I don't know who the ref is, but that's going to play an important role here. I don't know if it'll be Goddard or somebody else, because you're going to want someone who might be ready to go on the stalling call. I'm not necessarily accusing Ankalaev of strategically stalling, but I am going to say at a bare minimum, the position stalled out several times in that first fight. And again, there was a separation by Goddard during the course of it. I think you need to be ready for that no matter what. You're asking about Poatan here a little bit. The reality is, dude, he's got to be himself mixing up the attack. He needs to be using the hand and changing. But both of them played with stance switch. I would say Ankalaev much more effectively than Poatan. You don't have to necessarily go to it. But the point I'm trying to make is the variety of what Ankalaev was doing. He was the one leading with the feints. He was the one changing up the entries. He was the one kind of pressuring a little bit. And again, you just had a much more receptive Pereira. I think if he's the one issuing the feints, if he's the one who's getting, by the way, this is just a key point too. His jab has to get going to his, and it might not be upstairs. It could be to the body. But again, when he's playing the levels, and then that left hook whips around on top, it's like for example, in the Sean Strickland fight, it's because he was able to go deliver that jab to the body. That's what set the left hook upstairs. Like, this is what I'm talking about. He has to be able to deliver consistently, be able to get into a rhythm, lead. He doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. And I think if he tries to reinvent the wheel, it's actually going to be kind of a problem. You can get your guy defensive by feinting him backwards, or to bare minimum, feinting him into changing up his own attack, or to bare minimum, being hesitant. Play with targeting up and down, side to side, right? But mostly you're playing with the levels there, getting him back on that jab, which is, I think, the jab and the leg kick, both. The leg kick was there last time, which is why I'm not mentioning it now. But in conjunction, the jab and the leg kick to the body, upstairs, and then beginning to, this was a problem that both of them had in the first fight. None of them really ever had a sustained attack. You notice that? Like, one guy would land, maybe you would see Poatan land that, straight hook combo, but then he doesn't follow it up. And then Ankalaev would land, a big overhand left, but then he would just tie him up. And there was no one, okay, 5 seconds later, he's still pouring it on. 10 seconds later, he's still pouring it on. It was just touch, and then they would both somehow neutralize it, or it would get neutralized. For the winning party, I think trying to change that equation is also quite important.
Well, you mentioned Ankalaev, the fact that he was, on Ramadan, he wasn't able to eat properly and had to deal with all that. Also, he was able to feel Alex Pereira's power, sort of get some time with him in the octagon. Now, as we go into the rematch, obviously he knows a lot about Alex going in here, and it hasn't been that long in between fights. From your perspective, like, how much do you think they're looking to do different here? Or is it a situation where they already know where they can capitalize, and it's about sort of opening up those gaps even wider and capitalizing on those opportunities even more?
Yeah, I mean, one thing, by the way, I neglected to mention, like, as like a key for Poatan, if I may, I just think he has to. I think he has to discipline Ankalaev's forward pressure. It's not like Ankalaev is heavy on the front foot, but he does it enough. And again, it's not always when Poatan's backing up that he's losing. That's not my point either. But to the extent that he can be on the front foot, that's part where he can begin to mix up his game, right? So that's the portion of the game where he's able to go high low, and even if he doesn't land a big shot, just to run Poatan to the fence and then just grind him out. Like, you got to take that away, and I think part of that is he has to really pay a cost or have his rhythm disrupted through range by Poatan. Like, make it with such that, to the extent that there is any distance closing, it's on your terms, and to the extent that he tries it on his, he has to suffer for it. He has to suffer for it. The jab does some of that. The front kick can do some of that. I mean, these are all part of it, but you have to make it so that he has enough doubt planted about how to proceed and when to proceed, that then you can proceed, right? So that's kind of like a big thought. In terms of what they want to do here, again, it just felt like the intensity of that fight. I'm not saying that there weren't these other factors, to your point, injury, Ramadan, styles make fights for the first time. There's plenty of like good explanations, or maybe anyway, accurate explanations for why the fight kind of ended up the way that it did. But neither guy looked unlike themselves, good or bad. Ankalaev looked like a better version of him than I thought was there. Not a huge difference, but a little bit. And Poatan looked a little bit worse, but not a huge difference. Not by a significant amount. And so I'm not. I think if they try to overcorrect in any kind of way for compensating for different things, obviously, it's just going to lead to trouble. I don't think the mission really changes. What's the best case scenario for? What's the best? Okay, under what conditions is Poatan likely to win? He's likely to win in a striking contest, right? We don't think it's likely he's going to win, trying to jump guillotine. I think it's pretty fair to say. And so it's got to happen off of what? It's got to happen off of a series of strikes, unless he gets lucky, that he's able to be the one dictating and setting up. And I just think, as you know as well as I do, front kick, jab, leg kick. These are all the foundational elements that make that happen. Doesn't necessarily need to be in the front foot, but in all likelihood, the front foot is going to yield a better result. For Ankalaev, it has to be the mix. It absolutely has to be the mix. And by the way, if there is some positional stalling involved, it's the referee's job to call it. I mean, I hate that fighters do that, but it's just a reality. So to your point, I don't think you're going to get, you could get a different fight based on the intensity that they bring. But in terms of like how they match up, you got a decent sense of it the first time. The question is if someone can really just tip the balance.
I just couldn't believe that those leg kicks, even though Alex Pereira did land them, like Ankalaev just wore them. And it was almost like, because you would think, yeah, strategically, you take the leg out, you can't sort of push as much. Maybe you can't threaten as much with takedowns. You slow down Ankalaev a bit. I'm guessing that's what Teixeira and the team thought. And then when they saw Ankalaev still coming forward, I think mentally there would have been a bit of a like, oh crap, this is the first guy that's not biting on these like leg kicks and not reacting to them, and they're not impacting him as much as we thought they would,
Yeah, I mean, I think some of them were back leg kicks, but most of them were just off the front leg because like, obviously it's open stance, although you can obviously kick off the back leg of open stance too. But what I'm saying is, there's an interesting question there in my mind too. I know the injury was, I believe, related to the hand, but who knows to what extent he was able to plant balance, weight, what that did for him. How confident he felt in his defense because he might have had not just an injury, but several of them, or some kind of complicating factor in addition to the injury as well, and like to what extent that changes. Because to your point, as I mentioned earlier, like if you're Poatan and you're landing leg kicks on this guy, like what is the point of the leg kicks? Okay, they score, there's visible damage, but the real point is to hurt him. If you can stop him with it, great, but you're probably not going to stop him with it. But you should be able to alter his game. And in a sense, he did, because sometimes he would get hit with the leg kick when Poatan was trying to put a little bit of a sequence together, but then he would just get run into the wall. Well, now it's not really having the effect that you want it to have if he's stalling you out. You have to have a better deterrent effect, or at bare minimum, a better defensive wrestling effect, such that you can instantly neutralize that so he can get right back to those conditions. The conditions under which they succeed are not a secret.
Yeah, you look at the stats here, and again, like you said, there's a variety of kicks that Pereira threw. There was 48 leg kicks landed out of 55 in the first fight, 11 headshots out of 57, 17 body shots out of 25, and Ankalaev had 36 out of 112 headshots landed, 30 out of 39 body shots landed, and 28 out of 29 leg kicks landed. So it does kind of tell the tale of Pereira having an injured hand, right? Like it was very, very focused in that one area. It'll be interesting to see if he can increase those numbers, like you said, with the jab and setting up his shots better and everything in this rematch. Got to ask you though, if this is a repeat, or even if Ankalaev goes out there and dominates Pereira even a little bit more, what do you think is next for Alex Pereira in his career? I mean, he's had a crazy career, but I'm guessing he'll want to keep going after this, win or lose.
Yeah, by the way, to the point you raised, he targeted the head in the fight with Ankalaev 16 or 17% of the time. He targeted the head in the Khalil Roundtree fight 72% of the time.
There it is. Well, there it is.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
so you can look at
those
striking numbers and you're like, oh, well, that, they're, I mean, yes, they're way down. And that's, by the way, also everything is just way down. Like there's also that part too. Yeah. But when you look at the targeting, it's pretty clear that this dude was holstered. That's what I'm saying. He didn't move in a way that seemed, wow. It wasn't like BJ Penn getting on the balls of his feet in the third Edgar fight. You're like, what the fuck are you doing? Right? It's not that. You know, it's
Mhm.
he looked kind of like himself, just less. Let's see what happens if we can get closer to 72% targeting the head by Poatan.
What do you think happens to him if he gets dominated by Ankalaev in this rematch?
Probably goes to heavyweight and sees if he can, get a big fight there. Maybe he'll stick around for a couple more big fights. I saw a stat today. If he ends up winning on Saturday, he would be the oldest UFC champ currently on the roster.
Oh, wow.
among
Okay.
among active champions is the better way to
Okay.
say that.
Yep.
Among active champions. And I think I think Ankalaev 33. This is another factor to consider. To what extent is he slowing down at 38? But listen, the answer is not very difficult to figure out. What kind of big fights would be available to him and in what scenario? Like, for example, if you get another kind of fight where it's just a grinding affair and he says, I want to go to heavyweight, would you say no to an Aspinall fight in that case? I'm not saying it would be deserved, but I'm saying what would be the public appetite? It's going to be dampened because he's now coming off of back-to-back boring losses. Like, that would hurt, but it wouldn't be
Mm.
prohibitive. It would not be impossible to imagine him necessarily up there, even though you would say, Aspinall beats him. But like, dude, they just don't have big. I mean, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. They don't have a lot of big names for him. It doesn't ruin it. Or, do they find another way to make another Izzy fight? I don't know if either one of them wants it at this point. Or God only knows. Like, to the extent that there are any bigger fights left, and this guy wants to continue, he will. And he has to know there can't be much time. He's on a second combat sports career, and that one is not necessarily coming to a close, but it's at a point where it's a question of, are you still elite? And once you go from elite to not elite, sometimes, not always, but sometimes that decline can be precipitous with disastrous consequences. Why it's a good time to call it. So I think he's probably going to stick around and probably has a few more big fights, something like that.
Yeah. I wonder if maybe if Garn loses, maybe you do like a Pereira Garn to see if maybe he can claw his way to a title.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I'm looking at these rankings, Luke, and I'm going to be honest with you, my friend.
Yeah, dude. So
maybe
for
Derek
example,
Lewis, but then Derek Lewis might not come out. Like, it's such a,
Yeah.
But I'm just looking at these, like Curtis Blades. I don't think that's a smart idea.
Think about this at heavyweight. This is just a true thing.
Yeah.
You've seen people who had some kind of end to their run at whatever weight class they were in, and sometimes they go to another weight class, especially when they go down. But even when they go up sometimes, and it's just like, well, what the fuck was the point of this? Like, nothing happened. But how many times have you seen someone? Robert Whitaker did not have great showings at the end of his run at welterweight. It was not a bad weight class for him. He goes to middleweight, and you're off to the goddamn races at that point. It can be transformative in a massive, massive way. If he goes and fights Gane, and I'm just making this up, but if he were able to knock him or TKO him, what are we talking about here? Like, of course there's going to be a market for that. One thing you haven't asked, though, that I think is worth bringing up, and I don't really have a good answer for it. Remember, in 2024, there was this weird debate, or I thought it was weird. People were like, no, that's not true. It was a fine debate, actually. People were like, hey, who's the fighter of the year? Is it Poatan or is it Ilya? And my argument was it was Ilya because, yes, 3 is a larger number than 2, but the 2 wins I thought that he had meant more than the 3 that Poatan. That's debatable, but that was my view. And people went to the mat and they're like, this guy's the fighter of the year. And it's, dude, we were living at UFC 300, Shama, and all this stuff. And then he loses and everyone's just like, I don't give a fuck about this guy anymore. What happened? I don't really have a good answer for it. I don't fully understand it by any stretch of the imagination, but it is kind of strange, and it's somewhat looming over this fight, I think, to a degree.
Yeah, it's fascinating, I think, because does Ankalaev have that impact on people? Like, he's kind of dominating and he beats people, but I don't know, like, it's always almost in a way where you kind of lose steam when you fight him. It's hard to explain, right? Like, him and Jan, there was a similar sentiment as well. Like, people just aren't, I don't know. Are they like maybe not huge Ankalaev
fans? He extinguishes them.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a weird one, right? Like, I feel like when Pereira lost to Izzy in the devastating fashion that he lost to Izzy to, people were still big on Pereira. But against Ankalaev, he got beaten in that fashion, even though he was injured. And like you mentioned, they just kind of forgot about it. It's so strange.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know. It's kind of strange, too, to your point, because also you asked, like, what does he do afterwards? We alluded to this, but to the extent that he still has market value, that will determine his options to a degree. But if you get, I mean, imagine losing, to your point, if it's true that people like just get like deflated ultimately with their stock after fighting Ankalaev, what happens if you lose to him twice? You know what I mean? How deflated does your stock get if your thesis is correct? I guess we'll see.
I think if he goes out there and has a moment like a Nate Diaz, Leon Edwards type moment where it looks like he hurts Ankalaev or it shows some kind of improvement, maybe it'll be better for him. But if it's worse than the first fight, I don't know, man, it might be a rough one. And I think for the UFC, this is a very dangerous rematch that they're putting on right here for one of their last stars that they have. So anyway,
I mean, what are they? I mean, but what are their choices? Like, you know, they're making Ankalaev fight him twice. You know, I mean, you can't do much more than that if he keeps winning. You know.
Dude. Hey, just quickly, I just want to get your thoughts on the picture in general because we've got Khalil and Jiri fighting here, right? From your perspective, Ulberg was able to absolutely demolish and diminish Dominic Reyes in Perth. Who do you want to see get the next title shot? Let's say Khalil and Jiri have an absolute war this coming weekend. They're kind of big names though, right? If Ankalaev is looking for big names, Jiri and Khalil, they're kind of well-known and big names. At the same time, Ulberg, 9-fight win streak. Like, how rare is that? You and Brian Campbell were breaking that down on Morning Combat just the other day. People barely can get a 3-fight win streak. This guy's on 9, and he just put out Dominic Reyes in that fashion. So from your perspective, who do you think is going to get the next title shot? Let's say if Ankalaev wins it.
Yeah, for folks who don't know, I Fight Metric is actually based here in DC. I know the guys who are behind it. Now, this was pre-pandemic, so maybe the data has shifted to a degree. But the conversation that I had with them was, or one of the people that worked there was, the majority of UFC fighters never put together a 3-fight win streak. Like it's actually quite rare. Now that's changing. Definitely the way in which matchmaking works, and they're signing guys like Raul Rosas Jr. much earlier. So I suspect that the data on that is now a little bit more mixed. But still, it's not a everyday thing. It's not a common thing. And to the point you raise, Carlos Ulberg's at 9. Dude, to me, Carlos Ulberg's the guy. I don't even care who wins on UFC 320. Obviously, it's not my choice. Yeah. It's not yours. But I think Ulberg's the guy. Listen, I think Jiri is a more interesting fight for Ankalaev in the event that he wins. Doesn't matter. Ulberg's win streak is legit. He's done everything they've asked him to do. He didn't look super impressive against Blachowicz, and it was a little bit close-ish. And Reyes, it looked like was just a bad matchup for Reyes. But dude, you can't shit on a 9-fight win streak. He's the guy. To the extent that it's up in the air, I kind of telegraphed what I thought would be the other interesting answer. I think Jiri's the other interesting answer because Hill, former champion, worth considering. Now, if Poatan wins it, the conversation changes. But, I think beating Roundtree is a very credible and legitimate fight, especially where light heavyweight is at. Jiri is interesting, dynamic, fun. I think a little bit forgotten coming into this fight. Not a big talker, but certainly has that martial arts spirit. I think that's the direction you go. If Poatan wins, it's a little bit more up in the air. You could run back the Khalil Roundtree rematch. That's good. I think Jiri would not clearly get it. Then you sub in Ulberg. And in fact, I would if Poatan wins, to me, the pecking order would be it's Ulberg number 1 no matter what, but it would especially be Ulberg, Jiri, and then Roundtree last. Excuse me. Yes. Yeah, that's right. No, sorry. It'd be Ulberg, Roundtree, then Jiri last because Jiri, I've obviously fought him twice, and it went worse the second time than the first. Anyway, there you go.
For what it's worth, when I spoke to Ulberg throughout the week, he kept bringing up Ankalaev. So whatever the reason is, and I said to him, Ulberg, whenever I spoke to Ulberg all week, he kept talking about how he wants to fight Ankalaev. And I was like, do you realize that if Pereira wins, this is probably better for you with your chances because you haven't fought him yet. And he's happy to fight Pereira. But I think him and his team are already preparing for Ankalaev. He's flying over to UFC 320 for this backup.
That's confirmed?
Spot. Well, that's what he says. Hunter Campbell spoke to him. I still don't know 100%, but don't forget, backup spot, you get paid to weigh in. I don't think there's much of a chance of Pereira and Ankalaev not making weight. So maybe he's hoping just to, lock it in and get a little bit of extra money.
Fighters say lots of things, and how true they are could sometimes be, you have to be a little careful with that. So I guess we'll see.
Yeah, I do know that apparently they didn't go to the after party for long. He got straight back home, whatever. But let me quickly ask you about this Khalil and Jiri fight. This is going to be like a train crash. This is going to be unbelievable. I saw Jiri talk about in the media scrum, he doesn't have that hair extension thing that he usually has. It looks like he's sort of taking things a little bit more seriously. I know we've spoken times about the fact that Jiri has gaping holes that defensively he's probably not the greatest fighter, and then you have said that he's improved. I want to know, What kind of Jiri are you expecting here against Khalil Roundtree? Khalil is able to bring out the war in people, and Jiri brings the war to people. Do you think that we might actually see a more cautious Jiri go in here, knowing that this could potentially be his last crack at being a contender and a champion once again?
I would say that there's no way you're going to get an unrecognizable Jiri. I would just be shocked. I just don't foresee that. Unless he really is completely undergone an evolution. I think the lesson from the Jamal Hill fight was he was able to be A, more defensively sound, and then what was more important was B, that he could turn defense into offense. He could slip and counter. He could parry and punch. He could, all the thing. He could stuff takedowns and go for a knee. He could marry the two. So if you're diligent about your defense and you can weaponize your defense such that it all of a sudden just becomes offense, dude, you're off to the races. You can do a lot. The question is, how consistently can you do that and where can you do that? And we just don't have enough answers to that question. We had some as it pertains to Jamal Hill, but Khalil Roundtree to me is more explosive. He could put hand and feet combinations together better. Hill is much more of a boxer in MMA. Again, I don't think these are in any way controversial. So it's just a different, and I would argue more robust test of Jiri's defense. However, I do think his defense should be better. Whether it's enough, we'll see. But also, I would like to say that, I would like to see, rather, Jiri mix it up too. I want him to be fun and dynamic. We all do, but he seems like a phenomenal athlete. And just, the problem with guys who have not been defensively sound, and again, I do think that is changing, but to the extent that he has not been, I've said this before, it's like he's a higher level Michael Chandler, where you're going to be exciting. And in his case, good enough to be champion because, again, he's better, but it's still a trade-off that you're making, which is, I'm going to have more memorable fights. I'm going to have a bigger fan base, but on some level, I'm going to lose fights that maybe I shouldn't if I had practiced a different kind of game. And I think that he made that trade-off. And it's like, you can make that trade-off if you're not the guy who at his peak can win the title. But maybe Jiri actually is, and in fact did have the title. Could he actually get it again with a more thoughtful effort? If a guy is going to try, I'm going to cheer that kind of a thing. I'm going to cheer guys trying to take that thing, that process more seriously. And I believe in his potential. That's not saying I believe in his inevitability, but I certainly believe in his potential.
Dude, it's going to be an insane fight. I can't believe it's on this card. Some weeks we don't even have any fights to talk about. They just jammed this all in to UFC 320. I just don't know how UFC thinks sometimes. But anyway, Merab versus Cory, let's talk about that. Because Cory Sandhagen has been able to grow in front of our eyes. He's been able to grow as a fighter in front of our eyes. He's been able to talk about his personality and open up in front of our eyes. He's a pretty interesting, fun guy. He's had the experience in there with some of the best in the division. He now has the IQ to weaponize transitions, catch people in areas that maybe others couldn't. And Merab is the type of fighter that is like a tornado coming at you. He is, I guess, inhuman, or not. Is he an alien? I don't know, but he just keeps coming forward. Superhuman. There you go. The thing about him, though, is he does leave himself open at times. He does make certain mistakes. And because he moves at such a speed, it's not as thought out as Israel Adesanya or someone who's as technically sound. From your perspective with Cory Sandhagen, do you think he is able in this fight to potentially catch Merab in one of these transitions where he leaves himself open?
That's a tight window to throw in, as we say in American football. That's a tight window to throw in. Could you do it? Sure. But, you got to Tom Brady that thing. It's so, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yes, it can be done. What you're asking can be done. But what you always have to ask yourself is two basic questions, or there's more than that, but there's just two ways to think of it. One, do I have the skill set to beat this person? Most of these fighters are going to say yes, but, having a real examination with a coach, do I have the skills? Okay, now that I have the skills, what exactly do I have to do in order to make them work for me to get a win here? What has to happen? And I just don't think if you're looking at high percentage scenarios, or at least I should say, relatively speaking, higher percentage scenarios, trying to catch him in transition as a game plan to win, to me, that would be part of a winning game plan. It wouldn't be, that's where I win the fight. You know what I mean? That'd be
Mhm.
like, that's one battle line among many that I win this fight. But so I just don't think it's enough. You have to give yourself more of a chance. What I really think is not actually that complicated strategically or conceptually, but just a bear to do in practice, which is that, like, what does Merab do over the course of a fight? And especially now, dude, as he's getting, man, I've been like, Merab was winning. Merab, I said this a million times on this channel and many others. Merab has, I've been watching MMA a long time. He has the
Mhm.
best cardio in MMA history, and it's not close. And there's other good ones. Pete Kane obviously had it. I know he lost to Mexico City at elevation, but as a heavyweight at his prime or whatever, he was that guy. And certainly the Diaz brothers have been like that. And you could think of others. There's nobody like Merab. So he was able to just weaponize labor. That's what he was doing. He's like, we're going to labor together, and eventually, even though there might be you might be technically superior, I'm going to reduce that advantage through labor, right? So that was a big way in which he got the job done. But now he's adding sophistication to it. You saw that in his defensive effort against Umar, particularly with the takedown defense. I thought he was phenomenal there. It was incredible. I mean, again, it's still, pace is still a part of it, but I'm saying he's adding sophistication, and certainly against O'Malley, the choke, but also just the transition between these things. I mean, dude, it was. He clearly has now leveled up technically, and he's marrying that with labor. It's like, dude, how do you beat that? You don't beat it with more labor that you cannot do. You cannot do that. What you can do is what he does, namely, through that labor and now increasing technical sophistication, he just defines the terms. Over the course of time, you strike when he wants to strike. You follow his movement, or you react to his pressure. You're stopping his takedowns. You're trying to break his grip on your hip. You're trying to wrestle up from all fours. You're just always reacting to him setting the terms
Mhm.
of the exchanges or the interaction. I don't imagine you can fix that entirely, but you probably need to pick a couple of fault lines where he's not allowed to do that. And in particular, I think it's in the grappling. I think, and in particular, it's in when he gets to a control position. What is your answer for that off your back? What is your answer for that on all fours, or 4-point system? What is your answer to that shoulder to the fence, outside leg up, and you're trying to wrestle up and stand up? What if he has head height? What are all of your answers to those various positions where you can set the terms, even in cases where he is initiating that? Think of it this way. Sometimes guys, and this is jiu-jitsu is pretty, very good for it in this particular context. You can try and take down Charles Oliveira. So you're trying to set the context. But what does he do? He'll jump guillotine. Now he's setting the context. This is the central challenge in the grappling of Cory. Not to jump guillotine. I don't mean that necessarily, although could be part of it, but to reset his pressure, to reset his wrestling term setting into your term setting, whether it's a positional one where you're able to capture the back, whether it's the threat of it so then he has to escape, whether you can invert for entries to the leg, whatever that may be. And now he's reacting to what you are doing. You have to give him, offensive dilemmas, or I should say defensive dilemmas on his side, where he can choose to try and tough out a submission or escape. But either way, you're going to be able to reset the position on your terms back to your feet, which is what you're looking for, even if you're not able to crank, I don't know, I'm making something up, the heel hook. You see my point?
Yeah.
That is what has to happen. Some kind of way through those scenarios, Sandhagen has to be able to set it on his terms, because if you're just fighting on Merab's, we know which way that ends.
It's interesting though, because Sandhagen, thoughtful guy, thoughtful fighter, good IQ, but it's almost like he has to throw a little bit of that out, right? He has to be aggressive. He has to stop Merab from building that momentum early and getting that confidence early, and then beginning to put him in those positions where he's constantly reacting. Do you think Cory has the ability to do that in this fight?
Yes. Yes. I mean, don't you?
I think he's very.
Oh, it sounds
I
like
think
you don't.
sometimes. I think sometimes when a fighter is as technically proficient as Cory, sometimes it's about being like, all right, man, you're gonna have to take a little bit of a risk here and there. You know what I mean? And And then so that's almost like having to teach them out of what makes them so great in a little way. I just think with Merab, you can't let him get any momentum from the get-go, like you said, because that's when you end up in those positions.
Yeah, sometimes you'll see fighters who are thoughtful fighters, and it will paralyze them a little bit, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And not just thoughtful fighters, but guys who are very like um having control of themselves in various ways through mind power is really important to them. Let me give you an example. If you watch the Frank Mir Shane Carwin fight, Shane Carwin's pressing Mir up against the fence, and
Yeah.
he's battering him. Dude, Shane Carwin was like
Oh,
this just beast of a man,
yeah.
and he's battering him. And you're noticing that Frank is initially doing the right thing, which is staying calm, centering
Yeah.
himself, not reacting with alarm. But then Carwin keeps landing on him and he keeps not reacting with alarm. And you could see he's just trying to mentally not get agitated. And I'm like, you got to react. Okay, now you need to react with more urgency. It can do that, or guys can think that their problem solving ability in real time will just kind of carry them through. And the point you're trying to raise is, well, you just need is a lot more physicality. Yeah, you might know how to beat the guy, or at a bare minimum, you might have a good idea about a path to get there. But you need to lower the boom a little bit and just bring a certain degree of physical intensity with that, and a certain degree of physical urgency in certain cases defensively as well. And that will carry you further than just kind of like, oh, you know, I can outthink these, or I can control myself through these scenarios in ways that doesn't always yield optimal outcomes.
And John Wood's saying, you know, Merab's always getting better now that he's got the confidence. They're tightening up certain finishing moves and sequences with him. It's going to be interesting to see what version of him we get, especially knowing that he's a confidence player in the octagon. You would think these wins outside of the octagon have given him the confidence to improve as well. Just quickly, one fan question here. That's all we have time for. Paul Hughes versus Usman, PFL, big fight card. Man, I don't know why PFL don't strategically like organize their fight cards on other weeks. Like last week, it would have been maybe perfect just to do a PFL up against UFC Perth, right? Like they would have the biggest fight card of that weekend. Now they're going up basically against UFC 320 fight week. And even though I know it's not on the same day, you know how fans think. Anyway, long story short, how does this rematch go in your opinion? Can Hughes beat Usman here?
Dude, that first fight, I rewatched it too. That first fight bangs. It's so
Yeah,
good.
it's good.
It's so, dude, Usman Nurmagomedov's transitions from striking to grappling in the first 3 rounds, and in particular round 3, are so good. I mean, I can't believe how good they are. Listen, man, I feel bad beating up on PFL all the time. I think they're like a wounded.
Yeah.
They're like
And
a
they
wounded animal.
have cheap tickets for fans. Like they do have a purpose. They're a place where people can go. That
yeah. I mean, I just don't know what kind of
part of the UFC.
Yeah, I don't know what kind of future they got, but this fight
only promotion with ESPN now.
Yeah, we'll see how long that lasts. But no, I'm not doing a bit. Like, you know, it would be wise to assume that ESPN has a choice to make, which is, okay, do we want to stay in the MMA and combat sports business if these are our partners, who we're doing this with, or do we just want to cut ties and put that money somewhere else? And I think if you're at PFL, and I doubt that this way, but I'm saying to people out there, I guarantee that calculus is being made by ESPN. I guarantee that it is. I don't know which way they're going to go, but that they are having those discussions, it's a certainty they're having those discussions.
I think it would be also just from the perspective, not as much about even PFL, but like if do we want to cover the UFC when they're on CBS? Because if we are still in the MMA space, if we're covering PFL, people would expect UFC coverage as well. But
they're not going to care. No one is going to be like, I need to see the manager. How dare you cover PFL and not UFC?
So they'll just ignore UFC, you reckon, and just focus on PFL if that's what they do?
That part's a little harder to say because the reality is you're only going to get traffic from the UFC content.
UFC stuff, yeah.
So it's a little bit of self-sabotage if you want to stay in the combat sports business to just pretend they don't exist on the .com side. But dude, this fight is amazing. And by the way, the card itself is not bad. You got JJ Wilson from your neck of the woods. A very good fighter taking on Archie Colgan. People don't know who that dude is. University of Wyoming, D1, undefeated, like a beast of a wrestler. 12-0. I think JJ Wilson is 11-1, something like that. That's a good ass fight, to say nothing of Cory Anderson and Dovlestan Yagshimuradov, which is a rematch from their Bellator Grand Prix fight from 2021. And there's other good fights up and down that card, but that crown jewel, dude, that fight could absolutely headline a UFC pay-per-view, no doubt in my mind. Like, just in terms of, are these guys, worthy people to hold those positions on a card? That fight is amazing, and I can't wait for it.
Dude, it's going to be fascinating as well, because Hughes, and especially Usman, when they do make the transition over to the UFC, especially now that Islam's moved up to welterweight. I guess we'll see how that plays out. It's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out too. I'm sure the UFC just has their eye on them and is ready to, capitalize on.
Oh yeah, I mean, to the extent
what I mean? And then we'll see what they could really do with fighters like that. Like those. Anyway, it's going to be an exciting weekend of fights. I'll be watching the exhibition game of the Pelicans and a local basketball team here in Australia. So wish me luck. Zion's going to be here, so we'll see what he's
Zion
like.
Williamson.
Yeah,
he's
Ray
going to
Allen's
Australia.
Going to be. Yeah, and Ray Allen's going to be here doing a Q&A. I think KG,
Zion might bang Angela White while he's out there in Australia.
And then they're selling tickets to that as well, Luke. There he is. Of course, you got the pregame. That's happening. You, Jed, and Brian, the hottest pregame. I mean, the hottest preview show in all of MMA. That is happening. You'll be hitting the Devil's Reserve.
Yeah, that's right, on Friday. And then I'm going to try and race home in time enough to do a watch along for Usman and for Nurmagomedov and Hughes, and then certainly on Saturday watch along, and then more importantly post-fight show. Stick around.
Favorite post-fight show in the game as well. There is Luke Thomas, of course. Hit up the Substack. That's down below in the description. Good week for MMA here, Luke. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thank you, brother. I appreciate it.